All right, everybody. Hello. Thanks for coming. My name is Dr. Tim, and I'm here just to open up today's conference. The International Forum on Youth is the premier global forum within the California Community College system, the largest higher education system in the world. It is designed to begin addressing issues students will be facing as they leave college and start careers, families, and the rest of their lives. On the first day, we discussed democracy. Will it still be there as we know it now? Then yesterday, we addressed the link between one's interests and choosing a major. Very timely topic for college students. Today, we're going to talk about environmental policy issues. There will always be a tension between our quality of life and the stresses that lifestyle places on the environment, and water is the leading indicator of that. Tomorrow, we will hear from international students about their lived experience. That actually is my favorite day. The IFE, the International Forum on Youth, is funded and supported by the International Services and Programs Office. Our intention is to support college students by providing a launching point for their thinking. Today's students will soon be our policy makers. Let's hope our work today helps good decision making tomorrow. And with that, I'll turn it over to Professor Riffel to guide us through today's discussion. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here. Nice to see all of you. I see some new faces, familiar faces. It's great. And thanks to everybody on the live stream and on Zoom for joining us today. We're high flexing it, as they say today. I am thrilled to introduce my friend and colleague, Erik Altenbernd. Dr. Altenbernd is Associate Professor of History here at College of the Canyons. He's also Director of the Institute on Ethics, Law, and Public Policy at College of the Canyons. He joined our faculty here in 2017, not long after completing his doctorate at UC Irvine. His courses here at the college are primarily on United States and California history and build on his research into environmental and cultural history of Western North America, which I think is some of the things he's going to touch on this afternoon. Outside of the classroom, he is quite a busy person. He's engaged in a number of public and academic service areas, most recently serving on the U.S. Forest Service as a member of the selection jury for the St. Francis Dam National Memorial. He has also organized multiple panels here and elsewhere in Southern California at academic conferences and co-convened a major conference on the history of the frontier at the Huntington Library. Here at COC, he has organized events on the events of January 6th, pandemics in world history, conspiracy theories, the Apollo moon landing, and wildfire in California. So please join me in welcoming our presenter, Dr. Erik Altenbernd.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you very much. And thank you to Brent and everyone for setting this up. It's for my first time talking here for the Forum on Youth, International Forum on Youth, and so I'm very, very happy to be here. So yeah, the topic when I was sort of pitched to speak to, it was sort of about environmental issues, and for me, whenever I talk about environmental issues, it always comes back to water. That's my main interest, and one of my main interests in sort of my research background. And it's that in California, water is always an issue, and it's always an interesting issue. And so and it's never been more sort of interesting and relevant because of the era of climate change. And so the era that we're in, which is one of sort of global climate change. So so broadly speaking, there are different iterations of this talk over the last couple of weeks as I've been thinking about it and drafting it. And so basically there'll be four main parts. Part one, sort of just a quick rundown of sort of indicators of climate change in California. No doubt most of you have heard or read or heard about these things or studied some of these things in some detail. But we'll just kind of briefly open with that. And then part two, sort of focus on the water systems of the state of California. The water, one of the things that I found is, and I also decided to kind of take a more macro level view rather than, because I could really drill down or, go use a bad pun, go deep on this stuff. And that would be probably boring to most of you, but the water infrastructure of the state is largely invisible. We take it for granted. You just turn on a tap to take a shower, to, drink water or whatever. And, irrigate if you live in the city, irrigate your landscape or landscaping or whatever. But it's largely invisible and not well known and therefore, or misunderstood. So I thought I would just take a minute to kind of step back and do a big picture view of that. So So we'll talk about sort of the major water systems, the systems that deliver surface water. We'll only really scratch the surface of all the water issues in California. We won't even talk about groundwater and stuff like that, but it's conveying, moving surface water from lakes and rivers and whatnot around the state. We have a really complicated system. So we'll look at that in part 2. Part 3 is I'll kind of go into just a little bit of the history of how this water infrastructure system was constructed over the last century or so. And Brent said to shamelessly use this as an opportunity to shamelessly plug my California history class, where we do talk about it talks about environmental themes and topics. It's specifically water at different times in that class. So we'll talk about that a little bit in part 3, and then part 4 kind of assess the future of water. What is the future of the water systems and infrastructure of California in a period of global climate change? So that's kind of just a quick overview outline. Okay, so part 1, the indicators of climate change. Like other states in the U.S. and sort of the regions around the world, in the western region of western states like California here in the U.S., there's sort of California has an uncertain future regarding environmentally speaking, but especially in relation to water because of global climate change. The scopes and the impacts of climate change are not exactly clear. I mean, there's some things are pretty well known, and we'll kind of touch on that. But how that's going to impact daily life and sort of the lifestyle of living in California is not totally clear. So there's a lot there. There's some dire or ominous signs, things to be concerned about for certain, for sure. But I'm going to try to end this on sort of a positive note because there's a recent novel that came out, Gold, Citrus, and Fame. I think it's the title, if I remember it correctly. It sort of imagines, as many novelists do, a Los Angeles that's sort of experienced of the apocalypse, and where there is no water and there's just a husk of a city left. I don't sort of subscribe to that. I mean, I do think a lot of these water problems are serious, and they're gonna require change how we live in California, Southern California in particular. But I'm also not terribly pessimistic. I'm not totally pessimistic that life here is going to end, and that that it's going to be like the end of except on the West Coast, the end of Planet of the Apes, where California is going to be buried in sand or dust. For the 2 people that know that reference. But anyway, it's not all doom and gloom. So I'll try to end this on a positive note. But the best way in terms of understanding some impacts of climate change as we see them now in California comes from a recent report that was put out by a Cal EPA, or the California Environmental Protection Agency. Over the last 15 years or so, every 3 to 5 years, they put out a new edition of this report, the Indicators of Climate Change in California. The 4th edition just came out earlier this year. The previous edition, the 3rd edition, was published in 2018. But it's a report that kind of churns through environmental issues related to all sectors of the California economy and the environment in the broadest sense of the word. And I'll just kind of provide a couple of snapshots and highlights here. So for one, again, not all doom and gloom. You probably know that the state of California has very ambitious plans to reduce carbon emissions over the next 15 to 30 years, and eventually become sort of carbon neutral. This is a long-term process that's been underway already for a number of years. The report, the report is largely optimistic in the sense that carbon emissions have declined since roughly 2005. You can kind of see that on the graph here. There are some that say that that's probably not the case because of wildfires and some other things that aren't counted in the report, in the calculations that go into this graph. But nonetheless, the current sort of snapshot, the current statistics are that emissions are down. As far as total emissions, the transportation structure, cars and trucks and particularly still are still the largest contributors to greenhouse emissions. 40% of all pollutants. Reduction of transportation related emissions are down since 2004, but not quite to even the 1990 level. So that's still an area where transportation where there's need for improvement. But I suppose as more people engage or buy or use electric cars and electric forms of transportation, we'll see some reductions in that in there. Of course, the leading thing and one of the leading indicators of climate change, and this of course is global, national and global, and it's happening everywhere, of course, is the planet is warming. And so as a result, sort of statewide from 1895, when records were first, when meteorological records are first being kept, up till 2022, of course, there's been a 2 or 2.5 degree increase per Fahrenheit, of course, increase in the average temperature statewide. And that's an issue, and of course, recently it's accelerated. That 8 of the 10 warmest years on record have occurred between 2012 and 2022, just over the last decade. Let's see. Of course, a close corollary to this is the increase in the length and severity of droughts. A similar trend overall. California has become more arid, more arid since 1895, and drought. Sort of the drought conditions we have right now, which I'll kind of come back to, more than likely where you live. If you're living anywhere in Southern California right now, you're operating under some kind of water restrictions, where you can't water as much outdoors, and you have to sort of reduce the amount of water you consume every week or every month because you get a water bill every month, and that's because of the current drought we're in. Well, the conditions that we're in now are as bad, and probably going to expectations are they'll exceed the previous drought that we had between 2012 and 2016. I'll come back to that because that's part of a larger pattern, and we seem to be in the midst of what's called a mega drought, which is a drought that lasts decades or sometimes multiple decades, and sometimes even not just 2 decades, but 3, 4, 5 decades. And there have been many mega droughts in California, especially in the Western United States, over the last, say, 1,500 years. But there's a recent study that was just published 6 months ago by some climate scientists and paleoclimate scientists and stuff. But anyway, that shows that the current drought, the mega drought that we're experiencing right now, may be the worst one that's occurred in the last 1,500 years. So we're living in sort of what's the Chinese proverb? May you live in interesting times. We're living in interesting times. So I'll go into some of the nitty-gritty of that in a second. Of course, another indicator is wildfire. The easiest, you probably lived through this. If you've lived in Santa Clarita, maybe you've been evacuated in recent years from due to wildfires. This is something that we experienced all in the state, and of course, major wildfires have been in the news. Whole towns, like the town of Paradise, basically 75% of the city was destroyed due to a major wildfire a couple of years ago. But the long and the short of it is, this wildfires in the last 10 to 15 years have become much larger. In fact, we had the first what's called sort of a gigafire, which is a 1 million acre fire, was just in 2020, in the summer of 2020, late summer, early fall. But fires have become much worse, and this is a leading indicator of climate change in Mediterranean climates in particular. And you can just kind of see here that the average acres burned in the 2020 to 21, it already exceeds to 2010s, and the 2000s and 2010s were by far much greater than previous decades. So this is definitely a leading indicator of climate change, and of course, directly related to drought. And so, this is an issue in terms of water, because historically, 1/3 of all the water that's consumed in California on an annual basis comes from the northern part of the state. Of course, it comes from other areas, which we'll talk about in a second, Colorado River and some other, the Great Basin, in the case of the Los Angeles Aqueduct, if we live in the city of LA. But it's basically snow. It's snow water runoff, melted snow feeding into rivers that we've constructed a complex system to capture all of that surface water and then divert it, move it around the state in all kinds of ways. And so what we're seeing, because of higher temperatures and because of the sort of changing nature of the patterns, we're seeing less snow melt, less runoff, and of course stressed water supply. So I'll kind of come back to that. Okay. And of course, reduced snowpack. Also, lastly, there's been a loss in glaciers in California over the last century. So the stats here is 7 of the largest glaciers in the Sierra Nevada mountains have lost 60 to 90% of their surface area. And most people don't really think about glaciers because they're up in the mountains. And, maybe if you're an alpinist or a backpacker or, something like that, or, you're hiking, one of these people that, spends their time hiking through the Sierras, maybe you're interested in seeing glaciers and stuff like that. But actually glaciers are they're not only important indicators of climate change, both in the poles, in the North Pole and in Antarctica and stuff like that, on Greenland, melting glaciers and all. You've probably seen the videos of ice sheets falling off and going into the ocean, and this is going to be a key aspect of sea level rise in the decades ahead. But glaciers are actually really important for maintaining all kinds of elements of ecosystems, and especially for cold water species, including salmon. Runoff from glaciers and the maintenance, sort of the presence of glaciers is actually sort of really important for a variety of ecosystems. But you can see this sort of chart track some of these major glaciers and how they've really shrunken over the last century. And I just have some images to kind of emphasize this because they're cool images, and I've always been kind of fascinated by glaciers. But up in the Trinity Alps, on the sort of the northern, towards almost to the Oregon border, in the Cascade Mountains, there are 2 glaciers: the Salmon Glacier, which is the one here on the right, and the Grizzly Glacier, the one here on the left here. This kind of shows that over the last century, or really from the mid-19th century, the black line, when it was first surveyed in the mid-19th century, all the way to today, that it's just become it's shriveled up and become just a shadow of its former self. And the same thing here on the bottom with the Grizzly Glacier. A is the Salmon, B is the Grizzly on the bottom. Each one has shrunk considerably. This kind of give you zooms in on that here to kind of show, but photographs work better. So it's kind of reversed here, but the Salmon Glacier is here. The Grizzly Glacier is here. 100 years ago, the glaciers would have extended across this, the ground you can see here. And the only reason why these glaciers even remain here is that they're stuck in the shadow of the mountain, so they're not melting at quite the rate because they don't get direct sunlight. But in all likelihood, they'll if temperatures continue to rise, they along with many of the others will disappear or continue to shrink. So those are some of the leading indicators of climate change. And of course, they pose significant problems for the system that we've developed in this state for delivering water for everyday use. And so with that, I want to kind of turn to what are these symptoms? Where do we get our water in a place like Santa Clarita or LA County? Where do we get our water? So the place to start here is climate, or at least traditional climate patterns before the era of global climate change we're in now. This generally still holds, but the basic climate of the contiguous or lower 48 states of the U.S. Are sort of outlined here. If you're from the East Coast, so you've been to the East Coast, especially in the summer, it's very humid. Big rivers, it's all green, right? Because there's precipitation, heavy precipitation all throughout the year. Snow in the winter, and especially rain in the spring and throughout the summer. As you move west, right around the area where you get to the 100th meridian, which is the right side here of the Texas Panhandles, the 100th meridian, is the country starts, and as the land begins to move up to the Rocky Mountains, the land starts getting very arid, semi-arid, and then arid. And then as you move into, the Rocky Mountain region, the Intermountain West here, you have true deserts, and especially the driest area, the driest corner of North America is here in the very southeastern corner of California, which is sort of the Imperial Valley or the Colorado Desert, which is actually a very important agricultural land, only due to diversions from the Colorado River. We'll return to that in a second. But you have true deserts. But nonetheless, you do, even in the West, have these pockets of major precipitation, high elevation, mountains and plateaus, and that's been utterly essential to the establishment of modern civilization, modern cities, modern agriculture, modern life in the western part of the United States, California, and particularly Southern California as well. I'll come back to that. There's just a sort of map of the climate zones of California. I'm going to skip over this for the sake of time, but generally you can see, you have a variety of different climate zones in the higher elevation areas in the mountains. Of course, very dry, very dry in the south, Mediterranean climates along the coast. Overall, outside of the mountains, As you know, if you've lived in Southern California for very long, or maybe the reason why you moved here, the weather's great, right? No, not much in the way of rain, not much, weather, the temperatures are very mild. They basically fluctuate between a 15 to 20 degree range. The weather's great. Well, that means we don't really have a whole lot of water. There's not a huge amount of local water supply. Precipitation zones in California, it's sort of an extension of this. Not a lot of rain in the south. These of course, are all deserts. If you've driven to Vegas, not a lot of rain out here in the Mojave. Again, Mediterranean climates. And this brings sort of to the next one is the precipitation map is that most precipitation in California is in the mountains where very few people live, where people choose to live in the Mediterranean zone along the coast, the Bay Area, Southern California. There's not a whole lot of water. And this was recognized 150 years ago after the gold rush and as the cities of San Francisco and Los Angeles began to grow. So the question is how do we move water from where it's plentiful, usually mostly in the case of California, most in the northern part of the state or the southern part of the state, in the case of the Colorado River or a few rivers here in the Great Basin. How do we move water from where it's plentiful to where it's not as plentiful, or at least has the highest levels of demand? And that's the crux of the story I'll turn to here in just a second. And so what we've constructed over the last century, 120 years or so, is the most complicated water conveyance, delivery, movement system anywhere in the world. California it's on the one hand, it's utterly amazing. We have engineered a very, very complicated, complex, and fascinating water system. And so what this map here from these researchers at UC Davis have put together about 20 years ago kind of shows where all the water is plentiful and where it comes out of, especially the northern Sierra Nevada mountains and the Cascades way up here, down into the Sacramento River Basin here, but also the San Joaquin River Basin. All that water is captured and then moved across the state, mainly in a north to south direction. I don't want to get into north versus Northern California versus Southern California rivalries, the Giants and the Dodgers and the 49ers and the Rams. But preceding all the sports rivalries were rivalries over water. And it's still Southern Californians get to take it for granted, but Northern Californians, in Northern California, they probably will bring, if the topic of water comes up, they'll talk about how Southern California steals all the water from the north. It's not exactly true, and it's not exactly fair, but it's true to a certain extent, because most of this water is coming from the north and being funneled down south. This is a map that kind of shows some of that. We'll return to this map in a second. Shows some of the major systems. The biggest system is the California Aqueduct, and called the State Water Project. Kind of come back to that. It was built by the state of California after World War II. But you have other local water projects built by cities. The Los Angeles Aqueduct, come to that in a second. You have the Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct, which very famously transferred dammed a sister valley within the boundaries of Yosemite National Park. Built a dam there and then funneled the water from the Hetch Hetchy Valley to the city of San Francisco. And then you, of course, have the Colorado River Aqueduct that siphons water out of the Colorado River to greater Southern California. Okay. Now, those same researchers at UC Davis, I don't know if anybody knows Excel, uses Excel, and the engineers or people that use Excel in here. These researchers at UC Davis that put together that previous map, they put together a schematic, because they're engineering types. They put together a schematic of this system, this whole statewide system, this unnatural one state watershed that we have. And it is a massive Excel file. It's like 400 cells high by like 450 cells wide. And in fact, if you try to print it out, it's going to print out on like 2 or 3 sheets because it's so complicated and so large. And this is what it looks like when it's printed out into just two images. It's exceedingly large, it's exceedingly diverse, and it's exceedingly complex. It intersects multiple layers of government, local, state, federal, county, city. It's utterly complex, it's utterly complicated, and it's all right in the hairs of climate change, and at the crosshairs of climate change. And so we'll come back to that here in a little bit at the end. Just the state water project alone, just this portion, the blue purplish lines here, just that to give you an idea, just kind of zoom in. This is what all the systems in the state: canals, pipelines, pumping stations, power stations, power generating pumping stations, water treatment plants. It just goes on and on and on. Just to give you an idea, in the South, right, what this looks like is it is a constellation of an archipelago of a whole variety of different systems set up to allow you, when you go home tonight or when you leave here to go after this talk to go to the bathroom, to turn on the water to wash your hands, right? It's all designed to make water not only accessible to people on an everyday basis, that makes water the everyday life possible. And the reason why I love the topic of water, just as a quick aside, is because it is the fundamental building block of life, right? What is it? What do astronomers look for when they're looking for life on planets? They look for signs of water, right? How long can you go for before you die of starvation? You go 2-3 weeks, maybe a month before you die of starvation. If you don't drink water, you'll be dead inside 3 days, right? 3/4 of your body's made of water. 3/4 of the planet is water. Water is life. So, environmentally speaking, I don't want to be reductionist, but, I'm an environmental historian. All environmental studies and science really begins with water at the end of the day. So water is life. It really, we take it for granted, despite the fact that it's the most important thing in our life. Literally. Okay, here's the National Geographic map from the early 90s, kind of shows this system, these different layers. Of course, who's using all the water? So the water supply comes mainly from the north and the highly elevated areas, the mountains and such. It's delivered to the state through this complex system. We'll talk about more in just a second. But then how is it being used? Well, 70 to 80% of all, and this is in California, but this is also worldwide, 70 to 80% of all water used in California goes to agriculture, right? So if sometimes you'll see these things like, how many gallons of water went into a head of lettuce, how many gallons of water went into a hamburger patty. You'll see these kinds of things. This is around in the California, the United States, and around the world, the vast majority of water used around the world, California included, goes to agriculture. And then so you can kind of see that here is that most of the water being used in the water system of California, this system of infrastructure is used in agriculture. And of course, most of our agriculture is in the Central Valley and down in the Imperial Valley, that hot corner, southeastern corner of the state. And then, of course, you have, but the large volume of water outside of that, of course, is in urban areas. And in urban areas, 75% of our water goes to irrigating outdoor areas. So like if you have a single family home here in Santa Clarita, maybe up here on the hill in the summit, right? 25% of the water that you're paying for through your local water agency is being used indoors. 75% is used outdoors to irrigate. I'll come back to that. Okay. So that's kind of an overview of our water system and why we have it. So how did this kind of come about? Kind of show some pictures and sort of talk through it, mostly through images. So again, the system of water infrastructure we have is interconnected, but it's 3 sort of basic levels: local and municipal systems, state systems, and federal systems. And together, it constitutes the most complex water system devised anywhere in the world and at any time in human history. And what I find fascinating is it's just a century old. It's recent in historical terms. It's very recent, and all of it was constructed. Almost 95% of it was constructed just in the 20th century, from say 1908 to the end of the 20th century. So it's all very recent. And again, the big question is it going to work over the next century, over this century, due to changes in the climate. The major municipal aqueduct systems in the state are the Los Angeles Aqueduct. I'll show some pictures, but the LA Aqueduct goes right here. down, and then it channels water from the Owens Valley, 250 miles away from downtown Los Angeles, through the Santa Clarita Valley, down into the San Fernando Valley. The Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct, which I talked about, that delivers water to San Francisco, and the Colorado River Aqueduct. LA Aqueduct was completed the first one was completed in 1913, Hetch Hetchy 34, Colorado 39. The state infrastructure is really the centerpiece of it is the state water project. That map I showed, this whole system, this massive system built really over about a 25-year period after World War II. And then the one I won't talk about, but you have the Central Valley Project, a massive system that was built by the federal government for farmers in the Central Valley during the Great Depression and through the 1940s. Now, I'm going to go back to this map. So I want to talk about the LA, the LA Aqueduct. Again, this is my shameless plug for California history, but this is the LA Aqueduct here. Funnels water out of the Owens Valley, out of the Owens River, down to the city of LA. It's what allowed the city of Los Angeles to grow in the early part of the 20th century, in the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. The figure most famously associated with it is William Mulholland. If you've seen the David Lynch film Mulholland Drive, or you've driven Mulholland Highway or Mulholland Drive up in the Hollywood Hills, it's named after him. He was the head of the water. They had a variety of names, but the LA Water Agency, the city water agency, and he built the LA Aqueduct and was sort of a figurehead until the St. Francis Dam disaster, which was a dam built just about 5 or 6 miles as part of the LA Aqueduct in San Francisco Canyon, just a few miles here from this campus. That dam broke in 1928, killed about 500 people, 400 or 500 people. The numbers aren't exactly known. And after he was responsible for the construction and maintenance of the dam, and his reputation really kind of plummeted after that. And he died just a few years later. But prior to that, he was probably the most famous person in the city. So if you hear near the name Mulholland, think of water. This was the sort of the opening of the LA Aqueduct in a picture taken of the opening of the aqueduct in 1913. It was started in 1908. I think the estimates are, I don't remember now. Several thousand people showed up just out here in Sylmar, down the highway here in Sylmar, to sort of witness the opening of the aqueduct, because it was seen as a new lease on life for the city, a new phase in the history of the city. There's a lot more I could say about this, of course, but I won't. If you want that story, take my California history class. The original aqueduct cascades are here. You can see it here. That's here. It was replaced by a larger cascades, and when the aqueduct was expanded or reconstructed, there's the second aqueduct was completed in 1970. But you've no doubt seen this if you're coming from the valley, you're coming up from LA, you've driven past this, you've probably seen water floating down the hill. That is the LA Aqueduct. It's over a century old now. It's still an active asset of the city of Los Angeles that provides, I believe, about 25% of all the water used within the bounds of the city of LA. So if you live somewhere in the San Fernando Valley, you more than likely live within the boundaries of the city of LA. You're still consuming water from the system built just over a century ago. Now, if you haven't seen the movie Chinatown, you're culturally deprived, then you should correct that problem this week. But a lot of this history about the LA Aqueduct is very, very famously and a very heavily fictionalized way. Sort of piped, if you will, into the plot of this movie. But this movie is a great movie. It has one of the great plot twists of all time. I won't give it away. If just Google best American films of all time, and Chinatown will always be in the top 10. And so there you go. A piece of Hollywood, a great piece of American art deals with the history of water in Los Angeles and California. Now, one of the other things that's famous about the story of the LA Aqueduct is the water that's being piped in through the aqueduct to this very day comes from the Owens Valley. If you drive up Highway 395, if you want to go the back way into Yosemite, or you're going to go up to Reno or Mono Lake, but anyway, it's a little past. But if you're going up to Reno or Lake Tahoe, up Highway 395, you'll drive through the Owens Valley. The Manzanar Japanese relocation or incarceration camp of Japanese Americans during World War II was in the very, very center of the Owens Valley. So we have some idea of the geography. There's a river that runs through there, water coming down out of the mountains in that region. Then the Great Basin is the White Mountains and the Sierra Nevada. But anyway, LA tapped that river to in the early part of the 20th century. And the residents of Owens Valley, when there was a drought in the earth throughout the 1920s, started protesting against the city of LA in all kinds of interesting ways. In the early 20s, I think in 1924, there were hundreds of people, residents of the Owens Valley, went down to it was called the Alabama Gates, the main gate that opens water from the Owens Lake into the LA Aqueduct. They went and basically, occupied is the term we would use today in terms of protest, but occupied the LA Aqueduct for days. Children down there, it became nationwide news. And this is a picture of the occupation of the aqueduct by residents of the Owens Valley in the early 1920s. And then as the drought continued throughout the 1920s, there were bands of residents of the Owens Valley that went out and dynamited, destroyed sections. Essentially a form of terrorism. This is all over water and nothing else. Dynamited large sections of multiple sections of the aqueduct over multiple years. And so this is one section here of pipe that was dynamite. You can see the water running down the mountain. I forget exactly where this was, but there are multiple incidents of dynamite. This is investigators, I think, from the LAPD going up and finding caches of dynamite out in the desert. And so this kind of became one of the sort of famous chapters in the history of the LA Aqueduct. And that's really one of the interesting things about water history is it's always controversial, it's always complicated, and there are all kinds of fascinating stories. And so another thing too is, water's controversial today. Who gets it? Who doesn't get it? This is a perennial issue. This is a perennial problem. There's always a question of who gets water and who doesn't, or how much does this community get, and how much does this community have to sacrifice? And this is a perennial problem, one that's never it's open-ended problem in question, one that's never answered. So another sort of just a quick sort of history. I want to sort of talk about the Hetch Hetchy. The Hetch Hetchy Reservoir here, the one that feeds San Francisco. San Franciscans love to talk, I won't use a bad word, but anyway, they love to look down on Los Angeles because of the Owens River controversy and stealing water from poor farmers in the Owens Valley and stuff, and to make Angelinos and make Los Angeles rich and make Los Angeles grow. Well, they have their own sort of problematic water history. At least, I'll speak as a booster. I grew up in the Valley, so I'm proud of my Los Angeles heritage. At least we didn't destroy a national park to get our water. That's what San Francisco did very famously. Hetch Hetchy is a valley that looked, I should say, exactly like Yosemite Valley. Most of you have probably been to Yosemite, or at least seen pictures of it, of course. Beautiful glacier carved valley in Central California in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was basically a sister valley to Yosemite. But as San Francisco began to grow after the gold rush in the late 19th century, the turn of the 20th century, the city needed a new water supply very badly for a number of years. And very quickly, by the late 1890s and early 1900s, the Merced River and that ran through the Hetch Hetchy Valley here was identified as a key source of water for the city. And so you can kind of see the river here. The reason why the valley, of course, is backed up here, and there's a lake here on the other side of the picture, is because a dam was built there, O'Shaughnessy Dam, it was actually what galvanized San Francisco to build this dam was the success that LA had building its own aqueduct, the LA Aqueduct that we just discussed. But the dam was eventually completed in the 1920s, and served and still served as a major, less so, but still served as a major water source for the city of San Francisco and surrounding Bay Area communities. The reason why it's famous in not just California history, but American history, is it became sort of the Hetch Hetchy controversy of whether to build the dam or not became a sort of a flashpoint to the beginnings of modern American environmentalism. John Muir, you've probably heard of, the guy on the right, is sort of an environmental advocate. Here he's standing next to President Teddy Roosevelt outside of Glacier Point, overlooking Yosemite Valley itself. Muir here went on a years-long campaign to save Hetch Hetchy Valley. He was unsuccessful. But the controversy, mainly through the Sierra Club, but of course the controversy proved to sort of, historians and environmental historians identify this as sort of the beginnings of modern environmentalism and the modern environmental movement in the United States. Was the controversy over whether to dam Hetch Hetchy for urban growth in the Bay Area or preserve it, as it was. Then part of the controversy came from the fact that it was located within the boundaries of Yosemite National Park. So a sliver of the park was being sacrificed for the growth of a major city hundreds of miles away, about 200 miles away. But again, as with all things, you have people on both sides. Muir was on the side of preserving Hetch Hetchy, and so you have a petition here on the left, which or here on the right, which is a petition sent to the U.S. Senate from the counties of Merced and Stanislaus, if I remember correctly. But anyway, this against building, protest against the diversion of waters, right? And then the petition on the left is signed by people, local people in San Francisco and throughout California, telling their senators to vote yes on building the dam for the city of San Francisco. So it was controversial. Of course, today, talking about the future of water in California, today, there's actually an active movement in San Francisco and throughout the state to remove the dam and restore Hetch Hetchy. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. They're making incremental progress, but this is one of the logos of the movement. And then this was published in the San Francisco Chronicles a few years later. If they remove the dam, what Hetch Hetchy Valley would look like, and how it would be restored. Nature would take it back, in from 5 to 150 years. So another moment in California water history. Another one, of course, is the Colorado River Aqueduct. This was the second aqueduct that allowed not just Los Angeles to continue to grow through the 20s, 30s, and 40s, but allowed Orange County to grow. I'll come back to that. But the beginnings of the story of the Colorado River Aqueduct has to do with the construction of Hoover Dam, which goes back to a major flood way down here in the southeastern corner in Imperial County. Of California, because down there you had farmers that were irrigating the desert and actually quite successful, diverting the Colorado River and growing crops in the middle of the driest portion of North America. There was an agricultural community that had great success, but in 1905, 1906, and 1907, there were major floods along the Colorado River. And large sections of farmland were destroyed. What became a national issue was the Southern Pacific Railroad, this massive transcontinental railroad that linked Los Angeles and San Francisco to New Orleans. It was large sections of the railroad were destroyed as a result of the flooding. The Salton Sea, I don't know if anybody's been down there, but you go down to Coachella, you ever go a little south, you go to Coachella, you go a little further south, you can go visit the Salton Sea. That's a whole nother story, an environmental issue that's ongoing. But the Salton Sea was created as a result of this flooding event. These little diversion canals that the farmers built got overrun, and the water flowed out of the Colorado River down, down the grade, and then collected down into what became the Salton Sea. There was no Salton Sea there. Now there was 150,000 years ago during the last ice age. There was an inland sea or lake there. And it was very salty at that time. But the modern Salton Sea is an accident of these modern diversion schemes that were built in the 1890s, 1880s, and 1890s in Imperial County, in Imperial Valley. And this is kind of a picture, but you can kind of get a sense of how much water rushed in, along the railroad. You have these massive, it took years for this water to evaporate and percolate. Anyway, the result of this, it's more complicated than this, but the result of this is the construction in the early 1930s of Hoover Dam. If you've been to Vegas, maybe you've had a detour, went out to Hoover Dam, but this was the first big dam built by the federal government. And it kicked off a whole wave of dam construction throughout the American West and California. The state of California, we'll get to Oroville Dam in a second. The state of California is going to do Hoover Dam 1 better, and the state of California is going to build in the Lake Oroville as the foundation, and the Oroville Dam is the foundation of the state water project after World War II. To this day, still the largest dam in the United States. But this is Hoover, built by Bechtel Corporation, a San Francisco company. There's another dam is built a little further downriver, kind of near Havasu. Anyway, maybe the less you say about Havasu, the better. But this is Parker Dam. This was built mainly again as flood control for the water diversion plant that was built to funnel water out of the Colorado River, out across the desert, past Palm Springs, out to Riverside County for the continued growth of Los Angeles and Southern California in the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s, and it's still operating today. This is Lake Matthews, the terminus of the Colorado Aqueduct. This is a historical picture, of course, but this is a big storage facility pretty close to Riverside, a little southeast of Riverside, near Chino. And this was again for the growth of not just LA, but the 13 original cities that banded together to form the Metropolitan Water District and build the Colorado Aqueduct. But San Marino, Pasadena, Glendale, Burbank, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, Compton, Torrance, Long Beach, Santa Ana, Anaheim, Fullerton. So this is about the continued growth of greater LA, greater Southern California. And this was the Metropolitan Water District, which grew out of the Colorado River. This is the area that they serve today. They're the largest water delivery wholesaler. If you drink any water today, some of that water probably came in some fashion from the MWD, from the Metropolitan Water District. They basically deliver almost and handle all of the water that's used in Southern California today. Of course, what's driving this is runaway population growth. You can just read the things here, but California, in the early phases of the gold rush, the first U.S. census after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, when California becomes a U.S. state, territory and state, about 93,000 people statewide in California. By 1930, you have 5.7 million people in California. And the growth of LA and San Francisco is also exponential. And so there's just the need for continual sources of new water. And this continues after World War II. Of course, the real boom in California comes after World War II, where you have a 288% increase in population between 1940 and 1970. Population of California in 1940 on the eve of World War II, or at least American entry into World War II, it's about 7 million people. By 1970, it's 20 million people. Today, we're just under 40 million people. So we've doubled the population again since 1970. There's simply not enough water especially in Southern California, which is where most people live, to sustain populations of this size. And so because of this post-war population growth, when California displaces New York as the largest state in population, the state of California, and it's the governor, Pat Brown in particular, the Democratic governor, Pat Brown, pushes then to build the state water project. And that's this whole system here. This is Oroville Dam, largest dam in the United States, on the Feather River. It creates a massive lake, Lake Oroville. Oroville meaning Goldville, Oro being gold for Spanish, or Spanish for gold, I should say. Lake Dam, the Oroville Dam under construction. The water is funneled down from the mountains and from the Sacramento River down to the Delta, where the Sacramento River meets the San Joaquin River here, just near Sacramento. There's a picture of the Delta here, and then from the Delta, the water is channeled down further. And add the huge engineering feat for the state water project in the 60s and 70s was to get the water up the Tehachapi Mountains. That was the technical feat that held back railroad construction in the 19th century. Was the technical feat that had to be overcome for the state water project. And basically, it's a lot of electricity, huge turbines to shoot water up, and then let it fall down by gravity down across the Tehachapi Mountains. Now, Anybody live in Castaic, or you visited Castaic Lake? You fished, you've recreated at Castaic, or if you live in LA, you get some power from the Castaic power generating system. This is a power plant. This is actually a picture I took a few years ago, but this is the Castaic power plant. This is a joint operation between the state of California and the city of LA to use that water that's falling down, coming down by gravity down the mountain here, coming down into Castaic Lake, to use that water as it falls to generate electricity. And of course, Castaic is the closest part of the state water project, and the water that's stored there in the lagoon and in the lake is used for the greater LA area. It's a huge storage facility. So yes, it's a lake. You can fish there, do whatever, recreate there however you want. Of course, the levels are low because of the drought, the current drought. But it is actually a reservoir. And this map comes from they're going to be updating and modernizing Castaic Dam and Castaic Lake and Lagoon, the state water resources agency over the next 10 years or so. That's kind of what it's shown here. So what's the future of this system that we've constructed? It's unclear. As should be clear now, this system, these systems, the state water project, things like the LA Aqueduct, the Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct, the Colorado River Aqueduct, they involve dams and channels and pipelines and power stations, all these things. It's really quite at the base of it. It's actually relatively simple. They're built to capture, store, and divert and control surface water, specifically surface runoff, water that comes down primarily out of the mountains or collects in rivers or collects in lakes, and control and divert and push that water where we want it to go. But most of the surface runoff is coming from melting snowpack. Snow melting and coming down out of the mountains, and that's the challenge we have because due to climate change, the projections are we're going to receive much less snow than we did 50, 75, 100, 150 years ago. So, if we return to this map again, this is about taking water where it's most plentiful and moving it to where it's most in demand. It's in heaviest demand in the Central Valley, of course, the Bay Area, but particularly Southern California. I forget what it is. 1 in 3 Californians live in Southern California, maybe something like that. The vast majority of the population of California is here where we are, and we have the smallest amount of water. This is kind of just a map that kind of shows the population densities. It's sort of in this case, this is a cartogram that kind of shows that skews the state. If you show the state not by county, but by the size of population of each county, you can see that basically the vast majority, 3/4 or 80% of the population of California lives in the Bay Area or in Southern California, right? And that's why these water systems have been developed. And it's these water systems, this infrastructure we've been talking about, is what has allowed the Bay Area and Southern California to become these major metropolitan areas that they are today. It just simply would not have happened. And I'm going to skip over this for the sake of time. So what is the future of this system? At the very least, you just have to think about it the way an engineer would, right? And it's just a simple formula. Inputs minus outputs equals runoff. If the system is built on runoff and capturing surface water, runoff particularly from the mountains into rivers, you have to sort of look at it. What are the inputs? Well, basically precipitation, rain and snow. But snow's better than rain for all kinds of reasons, which I don't really have time to go into. But anyway, outputs are evapotranspiration. The natural systems lose water that humans can capture and use for their own devices through evaporation, through water being captured by the air, especially when it's hot, and transpiration, moisture leaving plants. Leaving the leaves of plants. And together, scientists refer to that as evapotranspiration. Of course, another output is, if you're thinking about this just strictly environmentally, of course, the diversions that we take out of rivers and streams and lakes are outputs. But strictly from a hydrological engineering point of view, you have inputs and outputs. And very simply, inputs minus outputs is what's left. The runoff is what's left, and that's the foundation of our whole system. 90% of I think it's 85-90% of the water we use is surface runoff from hundreds of miles away. from the Colorado River, from the Great Basin, or from Northern California. And so the question is what level of water inputs will California and the West receive during the 21st century, right? All climate models indicate that there are going to be fewer inputs due to higher temperatures, which leads to greater outputs, higher levels of evapotranspiration, less precipitation, which means lower inputs, less snow, and less precipitation overall, but less snow and more precipitation in the form of rain, atmospheric rivers, and this kind of thing. And of course, this brings us back to higher temperatures as a problem. The more water, if temperatures are higher, we're going to lose more water from evaporation, which means there's going to be less water in the system, creating additional stress. And of course, this leads to more drought, which of course drought means less inputs into the system in the form of any form of precipitation, which is what we had last winter. Last winter in December, we had those massive storms in early or mid-December, lasted for like 3-5 days, and then after that, nothing. There was virtually, especially in Southern California, no precipitation. And in the Sierras, very, very little snowpack, and which resulted in the water cutbacks we have now, which I'll get to in just a second. Historically, this is not unusual. Droughts are very common in California. One of the things I tell my students in California history, we talk about sort of average rainfall and what's an arid climate and what's a semi-arid climate. Okay, take LA County. On average, LA County gets about, in the city of LA, but say LA County gets like on average for the last 150 years, they say 14 inches of rain per year, which makes this a semi-arid or Mediterranean climate, right? But in the last 150 years, how many years did LA County actually get 14 inches of rain? None, right? It's just an average over 150 years. Some years it gets well above 14 inches. We get well above 14 inches. Many years we get well under 14 inches drought, right? So California's always been a land of extremes, too much or too little water. And so that's always been the case. But the problem we have now is we appear to be in the midst of this mega drought. This is just kind of from the U.S. Drought Monitor, which is sort of the government agency that tracks drought across the United States. From 2000 to 2022, yes, there have been some fluctuations. We had this terrible drought from 2012 to 2017, and we got a massive amount of precipitation and snow in 18 and 19, but then the drought just came back. And so, yeah, you have fluctuations, but this is why climatologists and others think we're in the midst of this mega drought, because if you look back over 20 years, yes, there have been some good years, but overall there's been more bad years, and we appear to be in the midst of a mega drought. And the concern is that global climate change means that droughts are going to be more common, they're going to last longer, levels of overall, which means overall average levels of precipitation are going to decline. And because of higher temperatures, what water we do have is going to be less. There's going to be less of it. So this is just a GIF showing images of Lake Mead, which is the dam, which is the reservoir behind Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. 2022. Little upriver from Lake Mead is Lake Powell, or from Hoover Dam is Glen Canyon Dam, 99 and 2021. There's less river in Lake Powell for reasons I won't go into. You guys don't care about the law of the river, but let's just look at California. Lake Oroville. The big Oroville Dam, the largest dam in California, is holding back just a portion of the water now that it was designed to impound, to control. And so this is the problem. Inputs are down, outputs are up, which means there's less runoff. Now here in the Santa Clarita Valley, the Santa Clarita Valley is fortunate. There's a large number of groundwater to be tapped here, and the local water agency does so. But if you zoom in here, the local water agency notes that half of the water that, if you live here in the Santa Clarita Valley, half of the water you use every day comes from the State Water Project. From the water project that originates with the Oroville Dam and Lake Oroville and the Feather River and the rivers upstate in Northern California in the Sacramento River Valley. Which means I'm assuming if you live out here, you probably heard that you're under some kind of water restrictions. Where I live out in Agora Hills, we're way restricted. We have to cut down 25%, virtually no watering. My lawn is gone. I don't know what's going to happen to it. But it's gone. It's been gone for several months now. We're under severe water restrictions because where the area where I live sort of is we don't have any local sources, significant sources of groundwater or local water. Everything is imported, and that's many communities in the state. So that's not right. Oh no, I didn't update it. I did update it. I thought I transferred it. So anyway, I had an updated version of this PowerPoint. I'll just kind of walk you through it because I've kind of reached my time anyway. I'm just a couple minutes over. The long and the short of it is that what's the future of water in California? In a sense, we don't know. We know that there's going to be fewer water, and the long and the short of it is that we all as Californians have to change our mindset. The era of abundance is over. We're now in an era of scarcity, and so conservation rather than consumption has to become a sort of our default. And but again, I told you this wasn't going to be a totally negative story. There are all kinds of ways, and the sort of very smart people that work on the water systems of California are working on this right now. And that really what it comes down to is, there are various ways to sort of improve water supply where we live. So for one, water recycling is going to become much more important. So if you ever have a bond measure to support a water recycling program that can turn sewage water into water that you can drink, it's called toilet to tap. It's really nasty, but actually if you go down to Orange County, right off the 405 in Orange County is the world's most sophisticated water treatment plant, where they take sewage and turn it into water that is so pure it will actually corrode your teeth. They have to add metals and other things back to it because they have the reverse osmosis, and all of this is so sophisticated. They can take the dirtiest water and make it clean. And in fact, because people in Orange County are still kind of what's called the yuck factor, they actually pipe that water back into the Santa Ana River and let it come back down and then refilter it again, just because it's more natural, because people are more comfortable drinking dirty water out of the Santa Ana River basin as opposed to the actual clean, purified water that comes out of the water plant. But this is the future. In areas like here, water treatment and conserving the water we have and treating dirty water is going to be key. Of course, we can use recycled water for landscape irrigation. That's already underway in many communities. Desalination is coming online. This is going to be a discussion in the future. There's already a fairly large desalination plant came online 2, 3, 4 years ago in Carlsbad, down in North San Diego County. They're building another one. The same company's building another one in Dana Point in South Orange County. This is going to be an ongoing matter of debate. Desal is good. It produces local water, of course, takes ocean water and makes it into potable fresh water. But there are all kinds of downsides to desal. We can talk about that if you have questions, or at least challenges. But all kinds of other things. The Metropolitan Water District is paying people to rip out their grass and put in native plants and other permeable surfaces, and rip out impermeable surfaces, concrete and stuff that don't allow water to trickle down into the soil and into the water table. The more water that gets down into the soil when it rains and stuff like that, the less water we have to use to irrigate trees in our urban forests and stuff like that. There are all kinds of solutions. There are many solutions to our water problems. I get the point of this is I just wanted to educate you on what we have right now, what are the challenges we face, and then give you some idea of what the solutions are going forward. So anyway, with that, I've gone 5 minutes over. I said I'd talk for an hour. I've only gone 5 minutes over, which I think is spectacular. But with that, I'll kind of quiet, and then I guess we'll do like a Q&A, and we can take questions from people online or people here, or even just have a discussion. And if you have questions about California history, talk to me, after class, email me. I'm teaching it in the winter. I'm teaching it again face-to-face on the ground, probably just down the hall here in the spring. It's a fun class where we talk about U.S. It's not really U.S. history class. It's a California history class, but it's fun because we get to talk about local history stuff. Stuff you see every day, and stuff that's is much as directly relevant to our daily lives. So it's a fun class if you're interested in that. So with that, I'll shut up, and I don't know. Are we going to moderate or just take questions, or
We may have questions from the chat.
Yeah.
If not, I have a quick question. If you don't mind.
If I'm hearing you, it sounds like any sort of solutions we cobble together, it's going to be a tapestry of solutions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely no silver bullet.
Here. But going back to, you were talking about the usage of water by agribusiness. And obviously agribusiness is central to this economy and our survival. But I read about certain cash crops that use a disproportionate share.
Pistachios, almonds.
Pistachios.
Yeah.
I love almonds and pistachios, but I wonder, is there a future?
Anybody drink their almond milk?
Right. And I wonder, is there a future in the state of California where we regulate industries that are frankly less, no offense to the pistachio industry.
Yeah.
I don't need pistachios to survive. You see what I'm saying?
Right,
Is
right.
there a future there?
Yeah, and a lot of those pistachios and almonds are shipped overseas too, which also gets into where we're the one way to look at it is we're exporting our water right to other countries and stuff like that. If you want to look at it that way, right. Yeah, this has been discussed. This was a huge topic of debate about especially in the San Joaquin River Valley, in the southern San Joaquin Valley. We have a map here. Down here. You have a very, very powerful, rich, well-connected water district down there, and it's down here. This is the second driest area. The southern tip of the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley is the second driest area in California, but after this corner down here. This is desert, and they're growing pistachios and almonds there, and pistachios and almonds are really water intensive. They require a lot of water, and I'm not very hopeful, to be honest with you, because if you know the history of, so I'll give you an example just from history. These early water diversion projects going back to the 1800s and the turn of the century, these early water diversion, surface water diversion aqueduct systems they were originally built according to U.S. law. They were being built. They should have been built for homesteaders and people that were operating small farms. But and again, California history, we talk a little bit about this, the rise of agribusiness after the gold rush, where you have huge concentrations of land in the hands of small numbers of growers, which also leads to labor issues and the United Farm Workers Movement. All these things are connected, but anyway, there were tremendous debates at the turn of the 20th century into the 20s, even as late as the 20s and 30s, even as late as discussions on the state water project in the 60s and the 50s and 60s about limiting that any water that growers receive from these state projects, that there has to be a limitation on the amount of acreage that you own, right? And there was because many of these growers were rich and powerful, had access to obviously to decision makers and politicians. There's simply the acreage limitation never gained traction, and so we have this state funded system of water delivery in California, but it meets an open marketplace in terms of agriculture where there's just very little regulation. I think what's more likely to happen is that at some point we're going to have a discussion. If there's not enough water, are we going to continue to devote as much water to agriculture, or are we going to start cutting off and prioritizing in the long run of California and in a Western and frankly world history, cities win over agriculture. I'm just saying that it is value neutral, but that's typically what happens. So I think we're probably never going to regulate. We're never going to tell people if you get water, you can't grow pistachios or almonds. What's more than likely is going to happen is that agricultural districts are going to get less and less water. If it really comes, when push comes to shove, if water is needed for urban areas versus agricultural areas, the supply to agriculture areas is going to shrink over time.
And then so they may make a choice.
They're going to have to make. Yeah. They'll have to make choices about what's the most economical use of their water.
Quick follow up, and I'll stop. But California is, I think, the fifth or fourth largest economy in the world, something like that.
Somewhere between like fifth and eighth, depending on when you take the snapshot and who you ask. But yeah.
Okay. And clearly essential to the nation's economic health. Do you foresee a moment where, it seems impossible to me, but do you see a moment where you go back to that map of the country? We don't have to do that, but if we go back to the map of the country.
Well, I can do that if you want.
Well, you see all that precipitation, east of the Rockies.
Yeah.
this incredible engineering feat of aqueducts in the state of California, do you foresee a moment 50 years out, 20 years out, where there's a coast to coast, just like we built a transcontinental railroad? Why can't we build a transcontinental aqueduct system?
Yes, I think that will probably happen. Desal and some other things may come online to supplement the current system we have, which is diverting surface water and controlling and diverting surface water. But no, there have been plans. There have been plans to build pipelines from Alaska all the way down to California and the West. We have gas lines. So I'm going to shamelessly plug my California history class. We watch the movie Aaron Brockovich, and we talk about Hinckley, California, and how this ties the water, this famous issue of water pollution just up near Barstow. But the story of that is we have pipelines that channel natural gas all up and down North America, north to south and east to west. There's no reason why we couldn't build new aqueducts to transfer water from the east to the west. I don't put it out of it's been discussed before. It's never been done. But yes, I wouldn't be surprised if in 50 years there's like a serious discussion about building some kind of aqueduct to transfer water, say from the Mississippi River Valley to western areas, to Colorado or something like that. Now, the Mississippi River Valley is also is in a drought, and you might have seen like articles online about the levels of the Mississippi River right now are really low, historically low. So the question is the mega drought spreading east to other parts of North America and the United States? But yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point if something like that gets built. We can do it. It's just a question of money and political will. Yeah, technologically it's possible. Absolutely.
From Zoom, Cheryl Pennington says,
"Oh, Cheryl, thank you.
Excellent presentation. Dr. Altenbernd is also creating a U.S. Environmental History class, World Environmental History class, and Environmental Studies class. Check them out, and an Environmental Studies certificate is being created."
Yes, so I'll just so what I'm along in the history department with Cheryl, who's our department chair. We're working on creating a world environmental history class. So this environmental history class that will not just touch on water, but look at world history from the perspective of the environment, understanding how human societies have evolved over time in relation to the environment and vice versa. And then also a U.S. environmental history class, which of course would include water. But and yeah, we're working on an environmental studies certificate, and these are in the pipeline, as it were. Hopefully in the next year or two, these classes will come online. So yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Any others?
Zoom.
When we talk about conserving water, but then I'm thinking if we're moving water from one area to another, how does that affect land or just the habitats in that area? Like, is it affecting it? Because I mean,
it does, yes.
Detroit,
yeah.
Or like San Francisco.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the big issue. So going back to big projects, it's still in negotiations. But yeah, the biggest problem is because we transferred so much water from Northern California to Southern California, it has totally disrupted the ecosystems of the northern rivers. Salmon runs. The salmon are one of the species most affected, but many other fish species. It's totally disrupted the ecology of the river delta, of the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta river, and so there are all kinds of species there that are under threat. And so there's one of the most recent plans for the state water project, sort of to augment it, was to build these massive. I don't know if it's officially dead or if it's more abundant or just almost more abundant at this point. But the plan was to build these to help species in the delta, to build these massive new pipes, these new intake valves, and they would be underground, and they would to sort of leave more, not only leave more water in the delta, but manage the ecology of the delta. There's been species loss in the Colorado River. And dams are hugely destructive to ecologies. And among other things, they they disrupt the flow of the water and species that travel up, that travel upstream, and they create all kinds of environmental problems downriver. So yeah, no, these projects have changed the ecologies of these water systems in profound ways. And that's the balance, is that, we become, as a society, we become more mindful of that. And so it's like, we're not going to just turn these systems off, obviously, but how do we manage them? It's what political scientists call adaptive management, right? How do we manage these things to sort of to all the stakeholders, including non-human species, right? How do we balance all of these things, especially in an era of global climate change? That is the challenge. It's exceedingly complicated. And talking about careers, we're talking about careers yesterday. I mean, water law, water science, water engineering. Obviously, we've gone through a golden age of water engineering, but these are careers that are only going to become more important and in greater demand as we go into the future, because we are going to need creative solutions to these problems. So if you find any of this interesting, there's any number of career paths in water.
It seems like California is going to be a laboratory for all these other places.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, all over the West, right? But I mean, yeah, I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, I won't bore you. I'm fascinated by water law, and most of you just would not care. But I mean, just like if you're interested in the law at all, and if you have an interest in environmental issues, water law is a fascinating field. It's exceedingly complex, and I think it's exceedingly rewarding for those that practice it. It's also remunerative. People make money in water law because it's so highly specialized and so important. It's just going to become more important as we go forward in the future. So that's something to think about. Since you were talking about, I thought that when it was mentioned, you guys had a career, talking about careers. If you have interest in these things, there's so many careers where you can take intellectual or personal interest and find career pathways for them.
One last.
Yeah.
You said there's ways in which we can clean the water enough to use it. Like, we are a state that isn't landlocked. We have a whole lot of ocean.
Yes.
Are we using the ocean water?
That's the desalination.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, no. In Israel, they have several desal plants in Israel. Obviously, I mean, they're starting to do them in Australia too, because Australia has similar problems. Mediterranean climate, the coastal areas, population centers on the coast. The issues with desalination is it's really energy intensive. So it contributes to climate change in terms of it requires just a heck of a lot of electricity to run these plants. They're also really it's problematic in terms of they suck in so much water that run through the desalination engineering systems that the local ecology is greatly affected. There's also brine, the output. You're basically separating the salt from the water. And so you have large amounts of salt left over. And it's like, where do you put it? What do you do with the brine? There's very little water, lots of salt. So that's the output there. The output is fresh water, but also a tremendous amount of brine. These are the challenges. But again, it's probably inevitable we'll see more desalination plants. But in the meantime, water treatment, recycling it's costly, and it takes a lot of money as investment. But you can use and reuse water that we already have, the water that we still import from the Colorado River, from Northern California, that can be used and reused multiple times if we have really sophisticated treatment plants. And the city and county of LA are starting to look at that. So if you see that in the news, don't be afraid of treated water, because it's one of the futures. We're gonna have to taste toilet water, but clean water, from the toilet. I mean, that is our future. Astronauts do it in space. We can do it down here, right? So
we shouldn't do it at home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there's other things too. Stormwater capture, that's a big thing. That was one of the things I forgot to leave out. I had the slide that I guess I didn't transfer the final file to my flash drive. But stormwater capture. We do. If we do have a winter storm or something, there's a large volume of water. The city and the county, and even there are ways to capture water and not just let it run out to sea in the LA River. That was the old idea. We channelized the LA River and just let all that water go out to sea. Well, Now we need to find ways of capturing that and incorporating it into our local water supplies. Yeah. So there are solutions. There are solutions. And you guys, if you're interested in this, you can be some of the people contributing to that. I hope I've inspired one or two people to think about it. All right. Anything else?
Well, I want to thank Dr. Altenbernd for this, one of the best presentations we've had at the Form 1 U. I really appreciate
Thank you.
this.
Thank you for inviting me.
Give it up for our presenter today.
Thank you.